So when the police asked me, did I have anything to do with it? Did I have with that girl? I told them no. I lied again. They said, are you sure you didn't have no contact with that girl? I said, no. Which I did. And the guy that was with him asked me, did you have with that girl? I said, no. No, I did not have with that girl. He asked me again. He said, are you sure?
There are crimes so brutal that they do not only take away the lives of innocent people, but also shatter society's belief in human kindness, leaving behind a festering wound in the heart of an entire city. That night, a terrifying and dark tragedy unfolded in the peaceful city of Knoxville. It did not begin with a carefully planned revenge scheme, but with a random encounter, a cruel decision made in a split second by predators. What started as an ordinary missing person case would eventually reveal a horrifying forensic nightmare hidden inside the small, run-down house at 2316 Chipman Street. A chain of inhuman and brutal acts so shocking that it not only brought 5 killers to justice, but also tore away the robe of the highest judge sitting on the courtroom bench. Welcome back to the channel Dark Secrets. Welcome back to today's case analysis. If you are someone who constantly searches for the truth, wants to explore the darkest corners of criminal psychology, and follow the journey of seeking justice for victims, please subscribe to the channel right now and turn on the notification bell. Your support is the greatest motivation that allows this channel to continue uncovering more fascinating and deeply analyzed cases in the future. The tragedy began on Saturday night, January 6, 2007. Channon Christian, 21, a senior student studying speech pathology at the University of Tennessee, and her boyfriend Chris Newsom, 23, a skilled carpenter, walked out of a friend's apartment at the Washington Ridge complex. They represented youth, passion, and a bright future that seemed carefully planned down to every detail. Walking toward their silver Toyota 4Runner, they simply wanted to return home and watch a movie. They had no idea that, hidden in the darkness of the parking lot, 5 strangers were waiting with guns in their hands. They did not know who Channon or Chris were. They were not targeting them personally. They were simply hunting for a vehicle. Under the cold barrel of a gun, the 2 young people were taken hostage and forced into a journey from which there would be no return. The following morning, the unusual silence from Channon's phone awakened a father's instinct in Gary Christian. Channon had never missed a work shift. She had never suddenly cut off communication without a reason. Unable to simply sit and wait for the police process to unfold, Gary decided to search for every possible clue himself. A weak radio location signal from her phone provided a small but crucial lead, guiding him toward the industrial area of North Knoxville. And there, in a dead-end area on Chipman Street, the vehicle was found abandoned and silent beside the road. Everything inside remained untouched, except for the wallets of the 2 victims, and the 2 people themselves were nowhere to be found. From that moment, the search officially opened a door into one of the darkest depths of human cruelty. After hearing this opening, what do you think about the father's decision to search for his daughter himself instead of passively waiting for authorities? A. It was the powerful and wise instinct of a father, because the family's initiative helped locate the scene as quickly as possible. B. Was an extremely risky decision, because personal intervention could have endangered him and disturbed the initial forensic evidence. Leave your answer, A or B, in the comments below and share your perspective with the channel. The presence of the abandoned SUV along Chipman Street was not merely a cold and lifeless clue. Right beside a rust-covered chain-link fence, Channon's car keys were found lying motionless on the cold, wet ground. The direction in which the keychain had been thrown acted like an invisible compass, revealing the escape route taken on foot by the person who had driven the vehicle, leading directly toward the rundown wooden house marked with the number 23116. The dark and haunting atmosphere surrounding that location seemed to foreshadow the horrifying truth hidden behind the stained and decaying walls. On Monday morning, January 8, 2007, the sunrise did not bring a message of hope. Instead, it delivered a devastating death announcement. A civilian search team scanning along the railroad tracks cutting through the abandoned industrial area discovered an unusual object hidden behind dry bushes. It was a body bound tightly, wrapped inside a floral-patterned blanket, and partially burned. The urgent identification process transformed the Newsom family's worst nightmare into reality. It was Chris Newsom. The autopsy findings conducted by forensic pathologist Dr. Darinka Milesnik-Polchin later reconstructed the young man's final moments of suffering. Chris had endured 3 gunshot wounds from a .22 caliber firearm. The first bullet struck his back, a vicious attack from behind, intended to completely eliminate any chance of resistance from the strong 23-year-old man. The second shot pierced his neck, and the third was a contact gunshot directly to his head, a brutal execution-style act meant to end his life. The perpetrators poured an accelerant over his body, driven by the desperate and irrational hope of destroying all biological evidence. However, the discovery of soot particles inside his bronchial passages revealed a heartbreaking detail. Chris was still alive and taking his final weak breaths when the flames began consuming his body. The discovery of Chris's remains near the railroad tracks, along with the floral-patterned blanket, an item later identified as belonging to the house at 2316 Chipman Street, provided investigators with strong legal grounds to raid the location. When the front door was forced open, the first thing that struck the investigators was not a visual scene, but a smell. It was the overwhelming odor of harsh cleaning chemicals, sharp enough to burn the senses, an artificial scent, desperately attempting to overpower and conceal the smell of death. The cramped rental house, measuring only about 800 square feet, was buried in complete chaos. Dried bloodstains covered the brick walls, and violent signs of struggle across the floor proved that a brutal and unequal attack had taken place inside. But among the horrifying disorder, Channon was still missing. The search inside the house appeared to reach a dead end, until one investigator moved closer to a dark corner of the kitchen. There, a gray 5-gallon Rubbermaid plastic trash container sat hidden among piles of scattered belongings. It was an ordinary household item, but when the investigator attempted to lift it, its weight felt disturbingly unnatural. When the plastic lid was removed, a horrifying truth emerged, one that left even experienced investigators frozen in silence. Beneath layers of compressed household trash and old blankets, the body of Channon Christian was discovered, curled up at the bottom of the container. Channon had been restrained in a position so cruel that it reflected complete disregard for human life. The killers had used braided fabric cords to tightly bind her hands and feet behind her back in a position known as a hog tie, a method of restraint designed to strip a person of even the slightest ability to move. A cloth had been forced deep into her mouth, while multiple layers of medical tape were wrapped tightly around her face, sealing from her chin all the way up toward her nose. The fragile body of the 21-year-old young woman had been folded and forced into an unnatural position to fit inside the limited space of the plastic container. The forensic conclusions revealed every horrifying layer of the truth behind Channon's death. She did not die from gunshot wounds. She did not die from stab injuries. Channon died from a combination of positional asphyxia, caused by the way she was restrained, and oxygen deprivation inside the sealed container. This meant that when the killers folded her body, placed her inside the trash container, covered her with layers of garbage, and sealed the plastic lid shut, Channon was still alive. She spent the final hours of her life trapped in a space that was cramped, completely dark, and filled with absolute terror. In the suffocating heat and the gradual loss of oxygen with every passing second, Channon endured unimaginable fear and loneliness as she listened to the footsteps and casual conversations of her captors just outside the thin plastic walls of the container, until finally, her heartbeat slowed and stopped forever. The discovery of the 2 victims at 2 separate crime scenes, directly connected to the house at 2316 Chipman Street, transformed what initially appeared to be a simple carjacking into one of the darkest and most brutal criminal cases in modern forensic history. It lifted the veil on the terrifying nature of the predators hiding within society, and revealed the depths of human cruelty that can exist behind ordinary walls. To understand the scale of the crime that unfolded inside the less than 800 square foot space of the house at 2316 Chipman Street, investigators from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had to carefully reconstruct every fragment of biological evidence left behind. The truth that emerged was not the result of a sudden outburst of rage or the panic of desperate criminals. Instead, it was a calculated sequence of imprisonment, torture, and the complete destruction of human dignity. The cramped house did not become a limitation. On the contrary, it transformed into a sealed fortress, a place where 5 killers felt completely protected by isolation and the power of numbers, allowing themselves to believe they had the right to decide the fate of 2 innocent people. From the very first moments when Chris Newsom and Channon Christian were forced at gunpoint through the door of the house, the strategy of isolating their victims was immediately put into motion. Chris, a tall and physically strong young man, was identified as the greatest physical threat to the group. To eliminate any possibility of resistance, the perpetrators separated him from Channon almost immediately. Chris was pushed toward the confined area at the back of the house, tightly restrained, and his ability to see was completely taken away with a blindfold. This separation not only prevented Chris from protecting his girlfriend, but also destroyed Channon's ability to resist psychologically as she was left alone in the living room with a group of threatening strangers. Chris Newsom's fate was decided in the early hours of Sunday morning, January 7th. Realizing that keeping an adult man inside the house created too much risk, the leader Lamarcus Davidson, with the assistance of Eric Boyd, took Chris out through the back door. Under the cover of darkness, they forced him to walk a short distance of approximately 100 yards toward the nearby railroad tracks. In that isolated location, the group took Chris's life with 3 cold-blooded gunshots. Eric Boyd's involvement in this part of the crime later became a crucial link in the investigation. Although he was not inside the house throughout the entire weekend, his actions in helping move Chris and carrying out the killing at the railroad tracks made him an inseparable part of the murder operation. After Chris was murdered, the full brutality of the group turned toward Channon Christian. For more than the next 24 hours, the house at 2316 Chipman Street became a nightmare stage for the 21-year-old woman. Forensic evidence showed that Channon was not kept in a single location. Biological traces and fabric evidence indicated that she was moved through multiple areas of the house, from the living room sofa to the bedroom, and eventually to the kitchen. Under the control of Lamarcus Davidson, Latalvis Cobbins, and George Thomas, Channon endured hours of unimaginable suffering through repeated acts of sexual violence. Her physical suffering was accompanied by an even deeper psychological torment. She was forced to listen to the conversations and cold calculations of the people who controlled whether she lived or died. The depth of the crime was further revealed through the group's disturbing attempts to destroy evidence. Realizing that their actions would leave behind a massive amount of DNA evidence, the killers came up with a horrifying plan. While Channon was still barely alive, they poured household cleaning chemicals directly into her mouth and throat. This act not only demonstrated their ignorance of forensic science, believing chemicals could erase biological evidence inside the human body, but also inflicted additional unimaginable pain during her final moments. However, what made the Chipman Street case especially haunting to criminal psychologists was the chillingly normal behavior of the 5 perpetrators. Throughout the time Channon was restrained, silenced, and physically exhausted inside the house, life continued as if it were an ordinary weekend. The group watched television, went out to buy fast food using money stolen from the victim's wallet, and laughed and joked together. The presence of Vanessa Coleman, the 18-year-old woman who had traveled with the group from Kentucky, added another complex psychological layer to the case. During the trial, Coleman's defense attorneys attempted to portray her as an innocent young woman trapped in a dangerous situation, manipulated, and intimidated by the violent men around her. However, a personal diary recovered from Coleman's belongings by investigators completely destroyed that image. In her own handwritten words, Coleman did not describe fear, did not record any attempt to seek help, and showed no signs of psychological distress. Instead, she enthusiastically described her trip to Knoxville, the activities they enjoyed, and referred to her time on Chipman Street as an exciting and memorable experience. During those 2 days, Coleman had numerous opportunities to escape when the male suspects left the house. She had access to a phone and was not physically imprisoned, yet she chose to remain. Her silence and apparent enjoyment transformed her from a passive observer into another link that reinforced the atmosphere of normalized cruelty inside the house. When Monday morning, January 8th, arrived, the increasing police activity around the area alerted the group of criminals. Realizing their time at Chipman Street was coming to an end, they decided to clean up the scene in a rushed attempt to hide their crimes. Lamarcus Davidson pulled the Rubbermaid trash container from the corner of the kitchen. Channon, now exhausted after enduring hours of torture, was tightly bound with her hands and feet pulled behind her back. A cloth was forced into her mouth, medical tape was wrapped around her face multiple times, and her body was folded and placed deep inside the container. To prevent anyone from noticing if they accidentally looked inside, they covered her with floral blankets and dirty household trash bags before sealing the plastic lid shut. The killers no longer viewed Channon as a human being. To them, she had become nothing more than a piece of evidence that needed to be hidden, buried, and forgotten before they abandoned the house and disappeared. All efforts to erase evidence through chemicals and deception by the killers inside the house at 2316 Chipman Street ultimately collapsed in the face of the absolute precision of forensic science. Although the perpetrators believed that pouring cleaning chemicals, wiping surfaces, or burning a body could conceal their crimes, they failed to understand one crucial fact. Every movement, every touch, and every interaction during the 48 hours they held their victims captive had unknowingly created a network of biological evidence that could not be undone. When the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took over the crime scene, investigators launched a large-scale evidence recovery operation, transforming the rundown rental house into a detailed forensic map that exposed the brutal actions of every individual involved. Despite the overwhelming smell of cleaning chemicals covering the entire house, modern DNA analysis technology successfully recovered biological profiles belonging to all 5 suspects from countless surfaces. Traces of skin cells, hair, and biological material from Lamarcus Davidson, Latalvis Cobbins, and George Thomas were found extensively on blankets, the living room furniture, bed sheets, and even on the body of Channon Christian herself. These physical pieces of evidence completely destroyed the initial lies and false statements made by the defendants. Biological evidence does not lie. It confirmed the brutal reality that none of them were innocent outsiders as they attempted to portray themselves to investigators. Alongside the biological evidence collected from the scene, the behavior and actions of the perpetrators during their escape revealed an even deeper level of arrogance and moral corruption. After fleeing Chipman Street, the killers separated in an attempt to avoid capture. Lamarcus Davidson hid beneath the floorboards of an abandoned house in Knoxville, while Cobbins, Thomas, and Coleman crossed state lines into Kentucky, naively believing that geographical distance could protect them from law enforcement. However, when the SWAT team stormed in and arrested the suspects in Kentucky, investigators discovered a shocking and infuriating truth. The perpetrators were not only calmly hiding from authorities, they were also casually using property stolen from their deceased victims. Inside their belongings, police found Channon's digital camera, still containing photographs of the happy smiles shared by Channon and Chris during their date on the night before the tragedy began. Even more disturbing, some of the suspects were wearing clothing that belonged to Channon and Chris at the moment they were taken into custody. This act of possession went far beyond ordinary theft. It revealed a psychological mindset that completely disregarded human life, a desire to consume, exploit, and strip away every remaining piece of dignity from their victims. Facing a complicated case involving multiple offenders, each playing different roles at different moments, the Knox County District Attorney's Office developed a powerful prosecution strategy based on the principle of joint enterprise. This legal foundation became the decisive element in delivering comprehensive justice for Channon and Chris. Under this legal doctrine, when a group of individuals enters into a serious criminal sequence together, beginning with armed robbery and kidnapping, every member can be held criminally responsible for the devastating consequences that result from that shared course of action. The application of the joint enterprise principle completely destroyed one of the most common defense strategies in multi-defendant cases, the blame-shifting strategy. During the trial, defense attorneys attempted to create a narrative in which Lamarcus Davidson was portrayed as the only true monster responsible for the violence, while the others were merely passive observers who were too afraid to intervene. However, prosecutors demonstrated before the jury that Cobbins, Thomas, and Coleman remained inside the house for 48 hours, shared meals purchased with money stolen from the victims, and took no action to rescue them or report the crime, despite having numerous opportunities. Their presence and support provided Davidson with the power and control necessary to continue dominating and torturing the victims for such an extended period of time. Their silence and assistance were not signs of innocence. They were forms of participation and approval of the crime. Based on this evidence, the indictment charged the 5 defendants with more than 40 serious criminal counts, including first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, armed robbery, and criminal conspiracy. Each charge was built upon a chain of forensic evidence that could not be broken. When the initial trials concluded, the harshest punishments allowed under the law were delivered as a response to the brutality of the perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, the mastermind and owner of the house, received the death penalty. Latalvis Cobbins and George Thomas were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Vanessa Coleman and Eric Boyd received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in kidnapping, assisting the crimes, and failing to report the offenses. The pain suffered by both families was never erased, but a measure of justice was achieved. To finally close the nightmare that had haunted the entire community, the city of Knoxville later decided to completely demolish the house at 2316 Chipman Street. The building was removed from the map, leaving behind only an empty piece of land, a permanent reminder that even the darkest crimes eventually face the power of forensic science and the law. It seemed that once the rundown wooden house on Chipman Street had been torn apart into piles of shattered debris and the harshest sentences had been handed down, the dark curtain surrounding the case of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom had finally closed forever. The local government's decision to demolish the property was not merely an attempt to erase a painful scar from the landscape, but also a desperate effort to ease the nightmares that had haunted the minds of the Knoxville community. However, justice has never been a peaceful straight line. Just as both families began searching for a small measure of peace, hoping to push away the unbearable pain of losing their children, a shocking legal earthquake emerged, destroying their faith in Tennessee's justice system and pushing them back toward the edge of uncertainty. At the center of this crisis was Judge Richard Baumgartner, a man who had once been viewed as a symbol of authority, representing the highest standards of justice throughout the original trials. The truth revealed afterward exposed a disturbing scenario almost as shocking as the crime itself. The judge who had presided over capital murder trials was secretly struggling with a severe addiction to prescription drugs. After spending hours portraying himself as the guardian of justice on the courtroom bench, Baumgartner was allegedly immersed in a hidden world of substance dependency, abusing his position of power by coercing probationers to provide cigarettes, drugs, and even engage in inappropriate exchanges involving sexual favors. The devastating reality that a judge suffering from serious impairment due to drug addiction had been responsible for making life-and-death decisions created a critical legal failure. Defense attorneys immediately seized upon this misconduct as the perfect lifeline. They filed appeals arguing that their clients had not received a fair trial guaranteed under the Constitution because the person overseeing the courtroom lacked the necessary clarity of judgment and ethical standards required for such a responsibility. Facing undeniable legal pressure, the Tennessee Supreme Court was forced to make a painful decision, overturn multiple original convictions, and order new trials for the defendants. The retrial decision was like another devastating blow against the still open wounds of the Christian and Newsom families. It forced Gary Christian, Mary Campbell, and their loved ones to enter another exhausting psychological battle. For the second time in their lives, they had to wipe away their tears, gather every remaining piece of courage, and return to the suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom. Once again, they were forced to sit across from the people who had taken their children away, look into the cold expressions of the accused, and endure the unbearable pain of hearing every autopsy detail, every bloodstain, and the final moments of suffering experienced by Channon and Chris brought back into the spotlight for legal arguments. The extraordinary perseverance of both families throughout the lengthy retrial process was not merely a fight to restore dignity for the victims. It became a powerful symbol of a parent's unconditional love, a force strong enough to help them survive even the cruelest failures within the justice system. However, the greatest legacy left behind after this legal storm was not only the restoration of severe sentences against the killers, but also the creation of a landmark legal legacy, the Christian Newsom Act. After witnessing the unprecedented misconduct of Judge Baumgartner and the loneliness experienced by victims' families as they struggled with legal expenses and emotional trauma, Tennessee lawmakers passed this legislation as both an apology and a commitment to fundamental reform. The Christian Newsom Act created a major transformation in judicial ethics oversight. It replaced the previous closed system of internal review, which had allowed serious problems to remain hidden, with independent, mandatory, and periodic evaluations of judges' mental health, professional competency, and risks related to substance abuse. Any sign of ethical misconduct would be addressed immediately rather than protected by institutional interests. In addition, the Act expanded victim assistance programs, ensuring that innocent families affected by tragedy would receive stronger legal protection, financial support during legal proceedings, and long-term mental health assistance. From that moment forward, the names of Channon and Chris were no longer remembered only as victims of a horrific crime. They became a shield protecting countless others from potential injustices in the future. The Chipman Street case therefore ended with a deeply reflective message about the nature of human society. It revealed a painful contrast between the darkest forms of human corruption, from the killers themselves to the failures of those meant to uphold the law, and the enduring light of forensic science, and the unwavering courage of parents seeking justice for their children. Crime can be brutal. Criminals can be calculated. Failures within the system can create even deeper suffering. But truth and love will always find a path toward the light. The wooden house at 2316 Chipman Street now exists only as an empty piece of land without a name. Yet the legacy of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom's suffering will remain forever, standing as a beacon that continues to awaken the justice system and remind humanity of the sacred value of dignity, compassion, and kindness.